Welcome to GPS, God's Prophetic Surprises, the program in which we take an intergenerational approach to the book of Revelation. I'm Jon Paulien. I'm a professor of religion at Loma Linda University, and with me is Iris Mamier, who is a professor of nursing at Loma Linda University. And we also have with us Guillermo Borda, who is a doctoral student in the book of Revelation at Andrews University and also a pastor in the community of Loma Linda. So welcome to our program. Today we're going to get into Revelation 20 and verses 4 through 6, and is some of the most complicated and interesting material in the entire book of Revelation. So open your Bible to chapter 20, verses 4 to 6. Join us, and let's get into it. Iris, please read for us.
All right. And I saw thrones, and they sat on them, and judgment was committed to them. Then I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their witness to Jesus and for the word of God, who had not worshipped the beast and his image, and had not received his mark on their foreheads or on their hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. But the rest of the dead did not live until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he who has part in the first resurrection. Over such the second death has no power, but they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years.
All right, so if you were with us last time, you'll remember that we took a look at the structure of verses 4 to 6, and we discovered that one piece of it seemed to be out of order. At least it's very strange. The beginning of verse 5, the rest of the dead did not come to life until 1,000 years were finished. That fits perfectly with verse 7. But the last part of verse 5, this is the first resurrection, is referring to verse 4. Mm-hmm. You see, so the first part of verse 5 really is the natural introduction to verse 7 through 9. The last part of verse 5 is the natural conclusion to verse 4, and then verse 6 in the middle fits well after that. So that's the bigger picture, but let's get into verse 4. It says at the beginning here, thrones were set up, and they sat on them. Mm-hmm. Who are they? Because you go back to verses 1 to 3, I don't see any obvious plural to match it to. There is the nations. I think it's in verse 3 that Satan might not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were completed. But you don't give nations to be judges, right? So that just doesn't work. So who are these guys?
Well, it's interesting to consider how the word throne is very, used widely in the book of Revelation. It appears 47 times throughout the book. Mm-hmm. However, in its plural form, it only appears 4 times. So of all these 47 times, 43 times is always in the singular. And it's not always positive. But you have the throne of God, very positive. But you have, for example, the throne of the beast, as if, chapter 16. And so if we can, I think it may be helpful to consider the plural occurrences, not alone to understand this passage, but over there in chapter 4, you have it twice, and it is the thrones of the 24 elders. Mm-hmm. You have the throne of the Father there in chapter 5, God the Father, chapter 4, sorry. And then later the Lamb will appear in chapter 5. And then you have these thrones, these 24 thrones, and seated on the thrones were 24 elders. So these are clearly positive beings in heaven with God on his side, by his side. And then you have in chapter 11, verse 16, the other. So twice in chapter 4, verse 4, once here in chapter 20, verse 4, and then the other time where it appears in the plural is chapter 11, verse 16, again referring to 24 elders. And the 24 elders were seated on their thrones before God, fell down on their faces and worshiped God. Now, this is not the end of...
Are you saying the 24 elders are the they?
I'm not saying that.
That's a big jump, right? To go back about 16 chapters.
I'm not saying that, but what I want to say is this, that in the book of Revelation, there's a distinction between the throne of God and these other thrones where people who are on God's side in the universe may sit. Some people may sit. But that does not mean that they are, divine, or they take the role of God or anything like that. You have people on the side of God, or that participate of the movement, that they are faithful to God. Let's put it like this: they're faithful to God, that they are also in thrones. And you have, I think, you have to consider also a promise that Jesus gives to the conqueror too, to understand this notion of the thrones. Right, you have promises to the conquerors in the message to the 7 churches, a promise to sit with him also on the throne.
So who's they?
Well,
Iris,
yeah.
Can you help us?
Well, I mean, when you read it, it seems like the camera is immediately shifting to the souls that were beheaded.
Uh-huh.
I mean, we typically look back, and then I would concur with Guillermo to go to chapter 3:21. Mm-hmm. There is that idea of throne sharing, mm-hmm. at least, even though it is Jesus' throne. But looking ahead, I think to 6, we have 2 options: the ones that were beheaded, and then the larger community of all those who were in the first resurrection. So that would be the way I read it, mm-hmm. the redeemed.
So it's everybody. Uh-huh. Do you agree with that?
I agree that this is the redeemed, right? I mean, the verse that she mentioned, right, correctly in chapter 3:21, he who overcomes, I will grant to him to sit down with me on my throne, as I also overcame and sat down with my Father on his throne. Of course, here's a mention to a singular throne, later is plural thrones, but I think it is a relevant verse to consider. But we can also consider more broadly the teaching of the New Testament, and also this passage, not just the throne. They're not just sitting on thrones. Right. What are they doing as they sit on these thrones, right? It says that judgment was given to them. Mm-hmm. So these are people who sit on thrones and they judge. So you have to consider that aspect too. So it's not just a reward of sitting on the throne, of maybe honor. It's more than that. There's a task that is given them. And you find in the New Testament the concept that the redeemed will participate in judgment as well.
Guillermo, I just have to interrupt you at this point. You know that this program is called God's Prophetic Surprises? Well, it's not only God that surprises people. You won't believe who is just standing at the door and knocking. It's Gustavo.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Thank you, thank you.
Glad you could make it.
Yes.
Serve the Bible for you and a seat.
Thank you, always a pleasure.
Gustavo Assis is a doctoral student in Old Testament, which is really important for us here, and also a pastor in the area. So we're glad that you could fight your way through traffic and join us.
Thank you.
And I was busy interrupting Guillermo, so let me continue.
Absolutely.
All right.
Good to see you both.
Yes. So anyway, one thing I've learned as a scholar is that 90% of the time, you can see everything that you need to see in translation. All right? As I work through the intricacies of the text. But this time is one of the 10%. Because there's something I want to point out that I think really helps us determine who these they are. And that is this. I noticed just recently that the word here for they sat on them, there's 2 words for Greek, in Greek for sitting. One of them is kathemai and the other is kathizo. So you have 2 different words. The word here is not the word used for the 24 elders. They're sitting on thrones is a different word. than this one here. So that right away settles that problem. Do you know where you find this word earlier in Revelation? This particular word for sitting? 3:21.
I have it
To the one who overcomes, I will grant to sit with me on my throne, even as I overcame and sat down with my Father on his throne. So I think that kind of, for me, that seals the deal, that the ones who are sitting on the throne, this is really the fulfillment of Revelation 3:21, the promise to Laodicea that overcomers will be granted to sit on Christ's throne. So Revelation 20 verse 4 then is looking back to Revelation 3:21. And it clarifies it's not just the beheaded, it's not just a small group, but the they who are given to judge, the they who live and reign with Christ for 1,000 years are all the redeemed, as promised in Revelation chapter 3. So does that fit in with what you were thinking, Iris?
Yeah, I just reading it as a lay person, I felt like that the group of martyrs is a subgroup maybe of that larger group. And yeah, I felt like it applied possibly to both. And
well, there is a Greek principle of merism, which is it gives you the part for the whole. You see, I think that's in Hebrew too, where you only mention a part of it, but it's really representing the whole. And I think that we have a good example of that here. So, anyway, one important thing is the judgment is not given for them. It's not given against them. It's given to them. So they are the actual ones who are judging. So there's a place in the future for the redeemed to do their work. And by the way, just in passing, a crucial word here in Revelation 20 is and. In English, and is pretty straightforward, but in Greek it can have two completely different meanings. One is additive, this and that. The other one is equative, this, namely that. All right? And so here you have four ands. I saw the thrones, they sat on them, and judgment was given to them, and the souls of those who were beheaded, and those who did not receive the mark of the beast, and they lived and reigned for 1,000 years. I think some of those are summative, additive, and some of those are equative. But you have to judge by the context. So I think the souls who are beheaded, those who didn't receive the mark of the beast, those who are giving judgment, it's all the same group. If you read the Kais in that way, it does work, I think. So I don't know if you have anything to add in terms of the Old Testament. Is there any equivalent to 1,000 years or something in the Old Testament?
No, not that I'm aware of. However, perhaps you already discussed the notion of Daniel 7 and the idea of judgment given to the saints.
Oh, that's perfect. No, we haven't touched that at all.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So the idea of Daniel 7 is that, well, let me go to the text instead of me paraphrasing it. So Daniel 7:21, it is this battle that is happening with the little horn that started little and grew, attacking the saints of the Most High. And then in verse 22, so all that is put to an end until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was given. Notice in my ESV it says it was given for the saints of the Most High. The Aramaic here is to the saints of the Most High. So for, of course, has that sense also in English. So probably is being used in that way. But it is, I would say it is almost verbatim to what we have in Revelation chapter 20. And the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. So they were acting like rulers. And so Daniel 7:22, it has, I think, a clear echo of that in this idea of the saints, or the unnamed they here being the redeemed, receiving judgment So they are acting as judges here in Revelation 20.
And if you follow the idea that the millennium is after the second coming of Jesus, Daniel 7 and Revelation 20 are really talking about the same point in time. The transition from this world to the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting piece, though. Why is God placing rule in the hands of human beings? That doesn't make a ton of sense right off the top, except for a text I also discovered somewhat recently. That's Hebrews 2. Let me read it to you. Hebrews 2, chapter 5 through 9. This absolutely blew my mind when I first saw this text, maybe 3 years ago, but it's only gotten bigger and bigger in my mind. Hebrews 2:5. For it is not to angels that God subjected the world to come. All right, so he's talking about the world to come, where we are right here in Revelation 20. He says God is not putting the universe in charge of angels. Maybe they are now, but this is the world to come, of which we are speaking. It has been testified somewhere, what is man that you are mindful of him, or the Son of Man that you care for him? You made him for a little while lower than the angels. You have crowned him with glory and honor, putting everything in subjection under his feet. Now, putting everything in subjection to him, he left nothing outside his control. At present, we do not see everything in subjection to him. But we see him who for a little while was made lower than the angels, namely Jesus, crowned with glory and honor, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. Paul slides from talking about the whole human race to talking about Jesus as parallels. Jesus and the human race were made lower than the angels in their humanity, but are then exalted to the highest place together. And my little heresy on this is that I believe that God created this world, created Adam and Eve with the ability to procreate, something which is not normal, apparently, for God's creations, at least, the angels and so forth. And the whole point was not only to populate this earth, but to develop over time a race of beings that are more like God than any other, in the image of God, with the ability to create, more like God than any other race, and eventually put them in charge of the universe. God was going to delegate to the universe. Now, sin messed that plan up, but Hebrews tells us God hasn't quit on us yet. Any reactions? Is that total heresy? Or only partly so, Guillermo?
Look at the hesitancy there, too.
Yeah.
I think it's intriguing because there's a unique experience that human beings have even after the fall.
Exactly.
I mean, the context here, even in the earlier chapters, it is all about the serpent, deception, and misleading, misguiding, and derailing. And that is our story. God has been misrepresented, and we were the casualty of that. But we came to experience the goodness of God. We came to taste that all these accusations are not true indeed. That God is kind, that he is generous, that he is not arbitrary, but that he is faithful and willing to go to the uttermost to redeem those that have been alienated from him. So we have a story to tell. And I came across John 5, where Jesus is really debating with the religious leaders about their unwillingness to see him. And in John 5:45, he says, "But do not think I will accuse you before the Father. Your accuser is Moses." And that's interesting that he says so. So in essence, at that time, he can delegate to Moses and to the redeemed to be the one really saying, has God conducted himself well? Is he doing the right thing?
God never wanted sin. God never intended sin. But the amazing thing is that because sin happened, God's little plan on this earth may be even more effective than it otherwise would be, because then those who are ruling the universe also have tasted the darkness of a different form of government, and will be able to step in and help people who are struggling with the character of God in future generations.
To me, one of the clearest sentences in this quiz, a rhetorical question that we find in the Bible that help us to grasp the concept that the redeemed will judge the world is in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 2, where in the beginning of the verse, the apostle says, or do you not know that the saints will judge the world? Right, so you have that, with that in mind, right, that understanding. And Paul says, right, you know, he's not, he just said, do you not know that the saints will judge the world? Something like, you should know that, right? You know that, right? Don't you know that? Right, so with that understanding, right, that knowledge that the saints will judge the world, then when we come to Revelation and we see these thrones being set up and people that judgment is given to them, they're given this task, and then you have this description of people who are faithful to God no matter what, then I think it becomes, you know, a very strong case that really there's a teaching here that during the millennium, the redeemed will be involved in a task of judgment, of judging the world.
Well, that's a perfect setup here. The question I throw out to all of you, what's the point? Isn't judgment something that should happen before the second coming? You know, so that everybody's clear who's saved and who's not saved. This is after the point of that decision. What's the point of judgment now? I'm glad you brought in 1 Corinthians 6 because we needed to do that. But clearly, God is putting a judging function and a ruling function in the hand of these miserable sinners who have gone through so much on this earth.
Yeah.
What's the point?
But then, of course, right,
the millennium?
But then at this point, they are no longer miserable sinners.
That's right.
Right? They're the redeemed, right? And of course.
But what are they doing?
Yes,
Why are they doing it?
I think we do well in acknowledging what we find in the Bible, that the judgment, that there's different phases of judgment that is presented to us, right? Even now, we are in a phase of judgment, even as we speak. And there's different phases of judgment and punishment and reward, right? So this will be a time where all the fates have been sealed. The decisions have been made, right? The people that have accepted God's gracious offer of salvation, they already counted among the redeemed. So the question would be, why judge, right? Well, for several reasons. You know, I won't claim to be comprehensive with this, but one of the reasons is so that it is clear for the redeemed also that God's decisions were just. That would be one reason why this judgment is helpful. So that in the process of looking at the books, the book of life.
No, as the redeemed themselves need to know.
Yes.
Because when you get there, Uncle Joe's not going to be there. Or maybe the Nazi concentration camp guard that abused you will be there. What's God doing?
Yeah.
You see, so there's a whole lot of things to sort out even after the second coming. And by the way, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that theologians like to invent fancy words for simple concepts. So theodicy, like justifying God's actions in this world of chaos. I think it will be part of this judgment. How do we make sense of the suffering that is going around the world right now, and God not intervening? Let's say the second coming not happening right now. Why not procrastinating, but why postponing it for so many centuries or so many decades? And that is the moment for the books to be examined. to ask God, not to kind of point fingers, but ask for his reasons. And instead of humans articulating possibilities, interpretations like we have right now in this world, theologians thinking about problem of suffering and the goodness of God, it will be God himself presenting his own reasons for things being the way they are today.
And we have here a strong contrast theologically between God and Satan in this chapter. Because whereas while God grants to the redeemed the task of judging, which will include making sure that they understand the justice of God, on the other hand, Satan will be deceiving people. So Satan doesn't change, he's still a deceiver. On the other hand, God is one who presents truth, who gives us an opportunity to understand it, who wants to make sure that we understand that he's a just God.
Yeah, I was just thinking, you know, as you guys were talking, what are these books? You know, the books will be open. It just suddenly hit me, will we have God GPT? You know, like you have with these artificial intelligence things, say that we will somehow be able to access the full bank of what God knows, which is more than any cloud could possibly know. One more text that we haven't covered here, which really jumped out at me in this relation, Matthew 19:28. Matthew 19:28, Jesus said to them, "Truly I say to you, in the new world, when the Son of Man will sit on his glorious throne, you who have followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel." So Jesus clearly anticipated that in the new world, in the world to come, his disciples would be judging the 12 tribes. So it seems clear that Scripture is saying that there will be a role for the redeemed in judging and ruling. In the minute we have left, let me just summarize a couple of things that I see there. We will need to understand the actions of God regarding our own lives. We will need to understand ourselves, as maybe we haven't before. We'll need to understand why some are there and some are not. We'll need to reconcile with people who are enemies on this earth. We're both saved, but we still have to figure out how to get along. And maybe it'll just be 1,000 years of recovery from the wounds and the effects of sin and our own actions and the actions of others toward us. Anyway, there's lots of prophetic surprises aside from Gustavo showing up in chapter 20. We're going to continue with that again next time. See you then.